Hello, and welcome to We the Students, a political discussion sponsored by Nauset Regional High School's AP U.S. Government and Politics program, in collaboration with Nauset's video production class. Doctor or physician-assisted suicide. It's a controversial topic that evokes passion from all sides of the issue: medical, ethical, legal, and religious. 9 states and the District of Columbia now all allow some form of physician-assisted suicide, with many more jurisdictions studying the issue. Over the next 30 minutes, we will discuss a practice that some call humane, while others label it murder. I am your guest host, Gwen Grant, a senior here at Nauset and veteran of the AP Government program. Just for the record, opinions expressed here belong to the panelists and are not the views of Nauset Regional High School or the Nauset Regional School District. Now, let's meet our panel. Arguing that doctor-assisted suicide should be legal and accessible for terminally ill patients are Callie Anderson, Nell Hamilton, and Charlotte Smith. Arguing against doctor-assisted suicide are Rocco Colici, Mimi Boyce, and Lil Hedrick. I want to start off first by asking you guys to define doctor-assisted suicide.
Okay. Physician-assisted death is a practice in which a physician would provide a lethal drug to terminally ill patients at their request, and then the patient can take the drug at the time of their choosing as a way to end their life.
So we believe this is morally right because every patient deserves the right to choose when they would like to die and the peaceful death that they want.
What are the safeguards to this
procedure? There's many. Basically, existing and proposed laws include the same safeguards and provisions included in the initial law because it started in Oregon. So the safeguards are mental health evaluation to evaluate impaired judgment. They have to have a terminal illness. It's self-administration. It's limited to adults, so you can't be our age and choose to do this. There must be capacity, which is a person's ability to satisfy the elements required for someone to enter binding contracts. So just that you're aware. There's a waiting period and certification by 2 physicians, so no nurses, and you need to ask 2 doctors who know your history.
Okay, so a lot of people might choose this route because of depression, and it's hard to tell if someone is depressed. And they have to go through a psychological evaluation, but it's only one, and only 6% of Oregon psychiatrists are confident they can diagnose depression after one visit.
This is different because you have a terminal illness, and yes, you can be depressed while having an illness, but you can't it's not just if you're depressed. There's more that goes into it, and there's more certification, so.
I think it's just testing mental competence is a big issue because what is the line and what makes someone more mentally competent than another person? Is a suicidal person who is in pain, are they in a position to be able to make that decision about their life if they're in so much pain and their judgment is clouded?
I don't think the pain has anything to do with the judgment being clouded, and I also think certified doctors and therapists and psychiatrists are aware of the signs to look for.
Well, the first reported death under Washington's state-assisted suicide law was Linda Fleming, and she was divorced, had financial problems, unable to work due to her disability, and was forced to declare bankruptcy in 2007. And initially, there were 2 doctors, including her own physician, who believed her request was due to depression. So
that's just one case, and I don't see, if you are depressed, this isn't the only way to, I don't know how to end your life. This isn't the only chance that you have. There's other things you can do. I don't see why someone would go through this whole process and fake an illness and, do all of this just for the outcome.
Well, they may not be faking an illness, but they could still be ill but have a chance to live. Or they could be taking the route for financial reasons because they can't afford to pay for it, and that's not a good reason.
But if they have a terminal illness, then there's no way that they're going to survive it. They're going to die eventually.
I do want to touch on what she was talking about. So money is a big factor in it, and the finances go into it a lot. So if insurers deny or even delay approval of costlier life-saving alternatives, then money-saving but fatal measures become the deadly default. So if money is a factor in your decision about whether you should live or die. Obviously, it's going to come into it because you don't want to leave your family with immense, medical bills. And so you shouldn't be having to think about that, but that's just the reality of it. So with no physician-assisted suicide, then this just wouldn't even be like a thought that you would have to think about. You would just, live and get palliative care through your, till you die.
But sometimes palliative care is like ineffective for some patients.
Well, Barbara Wagner was a 64-year-old great-grandmother with lung cancer, but the Oregon Health Plan sent her a letter saying that they would not cover the medication that provides a 30% increased survival rate, but they could cover the doctor-assisted suicide. So, she took the doctor-assisted suicide option because it costs less, but there was still a chance that she could have lived.
I think that was her choice, and of course, it's a shame that that those were the circumstances, but it's still her choice, and she has the right to be able to choose doctor-assisted suicide. And if it wasn't legal in her state, that wouldn't even have been an option, so she would have been left with no options. And I think a lot of patients are more comfortable if they have a lot of options to look at, so they have a wide variety.
Well, she could have, if she had the option to live because of financial reasons, then she could have, survived longer and done more things, and maybe she didn't want to die, but this was the most easy reason for her to.
Right, money should never be a factor or equate to someone's life or be even remotely involved in someone's decision whether to live or die. But that's just the reality of it.
I agree with that, but I also think she wouldn't have chosen to die if she didn't truly want to. She has doctors supporting her and asking her these questions, and her family. So I think she wouldn't have made that decision if she truly didn't want to.
Well, in one case, the doctor seemed like they were giving a sales pitch for assisted suicide. So Catherine Judson was a wife, and her husband had to go to the hospital, and the doctor was saying, "Think of what it will spare your wife. We need to think of her," he said, as a clincher. And she just thought it was ridiculous that he was telling her husband this.
Did she choose doctor-assisted suicide?
I'm not sure, it doesn't say, but still the doctor should not be saying that.
I agree with that too. I don't think that's the doctor shouldn't have any opinions about it. It should be completely up to the patient, and that's just that one case. So I think hopefully that doesn't happen in every case. It most likely doesn't.
So I just have a question. Why do you think it's been a little successful and a little not successful in the 8 states in the territory where it has been implemented? Why do you think it should be put into effect in all 50 states? Because as of right now, it's only in 8, and typically when laws are put into effect, it has to be a majority, 2/3 of the states have to agree to it, or it has to be a federal law where the representatives from the states have to agree to it. And in both cases where it's been brought up in the Supreme Court, it's been a 9-0 unanimous decision against it, that it's not protected under the Due Process Clause.
That it's 9 states plus Washington D.C., not 8, and also the 2 Supreme Court cases that tackled this were in 1997, and judicial activism for one could reverse this decision. And also the decision was that they left it up to the states to choose. It wasn't completely outlawed. Chief Justice William H. Rehnquist delivered the majority opinion, and he wrote that Americans are engaged in an earnest and profound debate about the morality, legality, and practicality of physician-assisted suicide. Our holding permits this debate to continue as it should in a democratic society. He also went on and continued to say, by extending constitutional protection to an asserted right or liberty interest, we, to a great extent, place the matter outside of the arena. So he's basically leaving it up to the states and saying that, as, the federal government, they're not, at the time, they weren't in the position to make this decision. And the states that have legalized it, there's also been bills introduced to reverse the decision, but they've all been denied.
True. However, as you said, it's only in 9 states, and Rehnquist, in his opinion, did leave it up to the states, but the states have so far recognized that only 20% of them have put it into effect. So that's kind of just the states saying so far that they don't think it's a great idea because it hasn't been put forth in more states.
I disagree with that because I think it's not like the other states who don't have it legal, they're not looking at the states who do have it legalized and saying, oh, this is not a good idea. I think it's just that maybe they haven't heard enough about like the pros of this. Yeah.
But how do you know that they're not looking at the other states and using information and like evaluating based on the other states and that they're just...
I don't know that for a fact, but I'd assume because there have been a lot of successes in the states that have it legalized, and the statistics show that like this is a good thing for many patients.
But there are also so many cases that have gone wrong, and 50% of the cases have gone wrong. And like the drugs they have negative effects. Like one person, he took the drugs and he was like having all these health problems and he had to go to the hospital right away. And the health problems caused him to die and not the drugs. And another person, they didn't die. They died after 104 hours after taking the drug, which wasn't immediate and painless.
There's also cases in, states where it has been legalized and before it was legalized, showing that like it does help the people who are taking it. Like those are a few examples, but that's not like what happens to the majority.
Yeah.
But the few examples, like there are people that it's happening to, and just because it's like not the majority, there's still that like percentage, the 15% of cases that go wrong. And if it should be legal, they should like change it so it's like more like 100% accurate and there aren't problems where people are in pain and like not having the care.
But if they don't like take the prescription, then they're going to be in pain anyways. This is just going to like end their suffering
For a lot longer too.
Yeah.
Longer than 104 hours or however many hours it was, because this is for terminally ill patients who are mentally competent and have, the diagnosis of only 6 months or less to live. So this is...
Also, they're like oftentimes the doctors can, or not often, but there's a percentage of time where the doctors are wrong with their like prediction on how long they can live. And there's other alternatives like they can take painkillers and the dying person can be sedated in order to have a non-painful death.
Even if they can take painkillers to suppress their pain, it's still for a lot of these diseases, these terminal illnesses. As time goes on, the people will, the patients will lose ability to move, like their bodies will basically shut down, and that takes away a lot of dignity of the patient. So I think everyone has the right to a dignified death, and they'd rather die when they still have the body that they want.
Just to keep us from getting a little too repetitive, I want to ask about the age requirements for being able to make that penalty, to make that decision. So you guys are arguing that it should be legal, but how young is too young to be able to make the decision with all of those other requirements met?
Well, in the states where it is legal, one of the main safeguards, like I mentioned earlier, is it's only limited to adults. You have to be 18 years or older, and it's up to the patient. It has nothing to do with the family. The family can't make the decision for them.
And well, just because someone is 18 years or older, their brain isn't fully developed until their mid-20s. And plus, there are elders who can be persuaded easily, and their opinions can change because of their elderliness.
I want to touch on, so not exactly age requirement, but the type of people that that physician-assisted suicide kind of not targets, but what the majority of people that use it. So it's usually white people who are wealthy, have very good insurance coverage, and then the people who technically don't have this as an option are just minorities or people who are less privileged in society. So the World Health Organization has recommended that governments not consider assisted suicide and euthanasia, until they have demonstrated the availability and practice of palliative care for all their citizens. So if these less privileged people don't have the ability because of their insurance to have palliative care, then why should physician-assisted suicide be offered to people who are more privileged? It's kind of like it blurs the it blurs the line more of where is the line of who can have this and who can't, and why should it be offered to one person over another? So why should
I
it?
don't think it's offered just to white people or
Well,
just
it's not that
wealthy
it's-
people.
It's
Not
just
that it's
more
offered, but
available.
it's who it's accessible towards, because they have the they have the means to do this.
I see what you're saying, but I think often palliative care, and Callie can touch a little bit more on this, is much more expensive, and so keeping someone alive for, say, 6 months would be much more expensive than doctor-assisted death.
Well, even with this, then that makes it less accessible to the less privileged people if they can't afford the palliative care.
Well, then
It's
this would be an option
Yeah,
for them because
this
it is
would-
more
Yeah.
affordable
So
than staying in palliative
killing
care.
themselves would be more available, and they should do
if
that
that's the
because
option that they want.
But what if they don't want that, and it's the only option they can do because of financial reasons?
Because that's just money. Again, money is such a big factor in this when it just like there's no reason that any like amount of money. It's if your family, if you're in this position and you're going to die in 6 months, but your family, if you stay alive for those 6 months, your family's going to have so much hospital bills and debt. You would want to be selfless and pick that option, but why should you even have to think about money in this if that's
Yeah.
just not what you
Like-
want to do?
Some people choose it so they don't want to burden their families. The percentage of reported Oregon cases attributed to patients' reluctance to burden their families has risen alarmingly to 45% in 2007.
Also, we can touch on, so physician-assisted suicide is when the doctor prescribes the drug but it's self-administered. Euthanasia is when the doctor does intentionally kill the patient. Now, this is not legal anywhere in the United States, but it is legal in other countries. But so let's say an infant or someone who's very elderly or who can't technically self-administer the drug, can't do it themselves, why should they be denied this, as so-called like relief? Why should they not be able to have this if someone with just as much pain gets to have it at the same time? So it's just, where is like the distinct definition of who can have this and who cannot? So that's why it just shouldn't be allowed.
I guess I don't understand what you're saying. You're saying that people who are, well, it can't happen to infants, but people who are elderly and aren't able to self-administer it.
Or have a
Yes,
disability.
Or like just someone who, so you take one person who can self-administer this drug, take one person who cannot, but they have equal levels of pain, both at the same exact level, going to die in 6 months, then why is so many people against euthanasia, but they are okay with, physician-assisted suicide? It's just not the same,
And it definitely opens the debate. Like, right now we're having a debate specifically on doctor-assisted suicide, but 10 years from now we could be having the debate on euthanasia.
Right.
And if that goes further, 10 years from that we could be having even more radical debates on different topics. So I don't believe that doctor-assisted suicide is something that should be put into effect just because, on top of all the other reasons we've already listed, it opens the door for so many other propositions that have the opportunity to be more cynical in the future.
And already there is a study that showed that 18% of the cases resulted in the physician directly intervening to administer lethal medication to kill the patient by direct euthanasia.
Well, then isn't that illegal? So the doctor then broke the law?
Yeah, but Oregon needs, or whatever, the whole system needs to be changed if it's going to be legal. It needs to be safer. And
Well, if it's legal, then that either make it legal and then give them time to figure out. These laws don't go into effect right away. It takes, like years for some of these things to go into effect. Like for Oregon, for example, it was first introduced in 1994, but it didn't go into effect until like 97. So they still had time to go over how to improve it, how to make it better, how to add regulations, add these safeguards into their law. So,
But clearly some of the safeguards aren't working because of the 18% of cases that kill the patient by direct euthanasia and the cases that gone wrong.
Right, and that's why it probably shouldn't be put into effect for all 50 states, just because only 9 states have put it into effect so far, and even in those states, as Mimi just said, it's gone wrong in some cases, and there's a lot of work to be done to make sure it's all gone correctly. So even in a perfect situation where doctor-assisted suicide is perfectly like put together, perfectly executed, it could even still, like, there are better options.
But those are like cases where the doctor's at fault.
Yeah, so there needs to be a way that they are like checking with the doctors or something.
Well, did you,
Then
like,
that's
in your
adding
research, did you find if those doctors were put on trial or charged with, because euthanasia is illegal, that wasn't protected under the death with dignity laws?
And
Well-
that could still happen even without doctor-assisted suicide.
There was a case where the Patrick Metheny received his assisted suicide prescription by FedEx, and his brother-in-law helped him, which is illegal, and this abuse of organ law was not mentioned in the state's annual report on assisted suicide deaths, so they didn't do anything about it.
Some might argue that we can have the death penalty in the United States, but which allows an able-bodied person to be put to death through some sort of the same ways a doctor would euthanize a person, which is illegal. So some might argue that why is it legal for the U.S. to do this to a person unwillingly, but we don't give them the option to do it themselves?
Yeah, to go off of that, so the death penalty, the government is killing an able-bodied person, as you said, against their will. They're not choosing to die. So why is that okay? But giving someone who wants to die the choice to, like, the ability to make that decision for themselves. Yeah.
Well, because the death penalty is a punishment. So they did something to deserve the death penalty. I'm not saying that it's 100% correct. I'm just saying that there's a reason why they're getting the death penalty. But with doctor-assisted suicide, in a lot of cases, these people have done nothing wrong. They have an illness, so they should be able to.
But isn't it the patient's choice?
yeah, you're alleviating their pain. They're choosing to do this because they are in pain. They are suffering. There's no cure. They are not getting better. And in most cases, for terminal illness, their progressive diseases are getting worse as they go along. So this is a way for them to die peacefully, die around ones that they love, or however they choose to do it. So
I have a story I'd like to share. There was a man named Matthew Donnelly. This was in 2015. For 30 years, he had conducted research on X-ray use, and most likely because of too much radiation, he was severely suffering from skin cancer. He lost his nose, his left hand, 2 fingers on his right hand, part of his jaw, and his ability to see, so he was left blind. His doctors estimated he had about a year to live, and while suffering through this excruciating pain in this final year, he pleaded and pleaded with his family to provide some way to put a stop to this pain. And one of his brothers couldn't take it anymore, so Matthew asked his brother Harold to shoot him. So Harold came into the hospital and shot him dead, and Harold was then tried and found guilty for murder. So instead of having to be shot by a dear loved one and going through that painful death, because obviously being shot is very painful, and the family member having to be put in prison for being merciful to someone they loved, Matthew should have had the right to choose his method and time of death peacefully, and then his family wouldn't have had to go through that.
Yeah, and that was in New Jersey, correct?
No, that was a different one.
Okay.
Okay, well, that case, I see what you're saying, but there was another case where Janet Hall of Oregon was diagnosed with cancer in 2000 and told she has 6 months to a year to live. And she asked her doctor about it, and the doctor didn't the doctor encouraged her not to give up. And so she decided to fight the disease, and 11 years later she survived. And instead of taking the deadly dose, she survived and said, "I am so happy to be alive. If my doctor had believed in assisted suicide, I would be dead. Assisted suicide should not be legal."
Well, that's a miracle.
Yeah, and I think that's wonderful that she survived, but it should be completely up to the patient to make the choice. They'll probably, the patient will be made aware if there is even a tiny chance of them surviving in the future.
But sometimes they won't be, the doctors believe that they will die, and there's that chance that they'll live and keep experiencing new things and
I think, but they would be going through excruciating pain waiting for that cure.
Yeah, you
so,
said it was 11 years. She's been then dealing with it for 11
but
years.
11 years, but she underwent chemotherapy and radiation and got over cancer. And that doesn't mean she was suffering the whole 11 years. Maybe it was within the first year that she was cured.
But there's also very few cases where that actually happens.
Mhm.
There's still a chance that there's a lot of cancer
There's a
people
chance
that
for
survive.
anything. I mean,
Yeah.
And
there's-
that should be
you could say
completely
for
up to the patient, as we've said. If this was an option for them, then they could make the choice to have a physician assist them in death instead of waiting.
To go back to your story, I think that that's it's a very sad story, but I think that was the brother's decision to do that, and I think he had to have in mind that that would be both very sad for himself and obviously his brother, because he shot his brother. But that's just, he could have, I guess it's putting his brother out of his misery, but you're literally shooting your brother as opposed to having him have a peaceful death, being able to say goodbye to all his family members. But maybe that might be a month at the end of 6 months of pain, but it's still less excruciating than being shot.
I see what you're saying, but I do think at least his brother Harold was Matthew pleaded with his brother and begged him to put an end to this pain. And I know, at least for me, if it was a family member of mine, it would be really difficult for me to watch my family member go through so much pain and not be able to do anything about it. And I think, it would just be very difficult.
But I don't know, I just still think that
I don't know if I could shoot my brother, even if they're going through a lot of pain.
But if this was an option, that he wouldn't have had to shoot his brother.
Yeah.
His brother was pleading
Exactly.
to die.
I still don't think I could.
Some might argue that we allow people to put down their pets when they find that the pet's been in enough pain, but the pets clearly cannot argue for it themselves. So very quickly before we run out of time, could we touch on that?
Yes. So I think it's interesting, most humans find it completely humane when it's our pets in question. So if a pet or animal is suffering through pain, we as humans take matters into our own hands and put them down. So why is it okay for us to do this with pets who don't have a choice and not give patients the option, give loved ones the option to make this decision for themselves?
Maybe they shouldn't do that to pets.
But it's a way for them to end the pet's suffering.
But
it's the same thing with
what if the pet doesn't want to die?
Well, the pet obviously
Yeah.
cannot talk and tell you that they don't want to
Exactly.
die.
I think it's just
So
a
you
different
don't know.
your argument.
Yeah, I think it's just a different matter of it's a pet's life versus a human's life. So if a human, I don't think we should give a human the choice, because they're a living person and they're not a pet who you're attached to and who's yours, if that makes sense.
But why should a human's life be more valuable than an animal's life?
Because it's a human thing.
Well, the
More
government's
valuable,
okay.
but
the government's job is to protect the citizens of the country and allow them to prosper and all of that. So why would the government provide an option for citizens to die if it's their job to protect the citizens?
Well,
They're not provided to protect the pets either. So.
Well, you could say that for anything. I mean, it's in med school, it's required for the physician to take the Hippocratic Oath, which is an oath of ethics taken by physicians that requires them to swear by these, healing gods to uphold these standards. And there's a lot in it that kind of goes against what there is today. Also, it wasn't an issue at certain times, and in the original oath, they mentioned that doctors should never use the knife, which is conduct surgery, which obviously you can't just not have surgery for people. So you could say the same thing for that.
All right. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time, so we'll have to hold our conversation there. We thank Nauset High School's television production class and Lower Cape TV for making this experience possible for all of us. This concludes another segment of We the Students, a political discussion sponsored by Nauset Regional High School's AP US and Government Politics program. I'm Glenn Grant. Thank you for watching.